You spend quite a bit of time with King David and his sin with Bathsheba. I found it very engaging. Let's talk about it for a minute, because here's a guy who the scripture says was close to God's heart. And he writes, according to the studies I've been doing, almost 5,000 Psalms. We just have a small smattering of them really in the book of the Psalms. This guy did a horrible thing.
Yes.
I mean, he spies this woman. She's bathing on the rooftop. He asks his servant, who is she, finds out, calls her over. I mean, what can she do? He's the king. Turns out she's the wife of one of his key soldiers, Uriah. And he sleeps with her. She becomes pregnant. He then tries to cover it over, tries to get Uriah to go and sleep with his wife so that she'll assume the child, and he'll assume the child is his, not King David's. That doesn't work, and so he eventually gets his commander to put Uriah in the front line of the battle to make sure he'll be killed, and he is killed. I mean, and then he somehow thinks he can get away with this.
Right, right.
Several sins committed by this man who is close to the heart of God. It seems to be quite a study. We would tend to just basically wipe him out, say, no, he's disqualified himself from being close to the heart of God or ever writing another psalm again.
Right, right. And we do that a lot, don't we? Particularly in church circles where we write people off and don't give them a further opportunity to minister. But what overwhelms me in that text is his misuse of his power, his slavery to his own sexual appetite. And what I find amazing in 2 Samuel 11, it seems to me it's the most extensive discussion of a sin anywhere in the Bible. All of 2 Samuel 11 is detailing his multiple sins there. 2 Samuel 12 is where God raises up Nathan the prophet to rebuke David, which is another fascinating part of the discussion. But the depth of David's depravity is that when he has to move to plan B to bump off Uriah, he sends the plan of execution by Uriah's own hand back to Commander Joab. And it's just a horrific series of sins in which more people than Uriah die. But 2 Samuel 11 ends with David getting away with it on a human level, but we read the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And then we get into 2 Samuel 12, which is just incredible, in how God raises up Nathan the prophet, and Nathan begins by telling a story to David and about a man stealing a little ewe lamb, and David says the man who's done this deserves to die, and Nathan says, you're the man. Yeah. It's very interesting in Hebrew how he does that, but he says, you're the man that you say deserves to die. You deserve to die for what you've done. And
of course, in the long term, he had horrific dysfunctions in his family. One of his sons sleeping with his wives, for instance, in public. We look at the story, however. We read Psalm 51, his remarkable confession psalm. It's very moving. It's very transparent. And he says, against you, you only have I sinned. And you make the point in the book that that's really the issue with sin. Ultimately, it's a sin against God, yes, even though all these other people are part of the collateral damage.
Right, right. Because it's God's holiness that's being violated. I mean, He is the standard. We're not the standard of right and wrong. God is. And even though David's sin had hurt a lot of people, in the final analysis, David had betrayed his own relationship with the Lord, and as a result of that, a number of consequences follow.
Do you suppose any of those people who were impacted as part of that collateral damage would ever have a high view of David again?
Well, I think the natural answer is to say no, as it is for us when we see great men or women of God fail. And I'm not making the case that they're to be put quickly back into public ministry, but we do believe in forgiveness, don't we? Yeah. And both Psalm 32 and Psalm 51 detail David's journey through what was for a time unconfessed sin, and God began turning the screws down on David, and David finally confessed his sin and found great freedom. There ought to be corresponding freedom from the people of God to welcome that person back. It's similar to what happens in 1 and 2 Corinthians with the guy who committed the great sin in 1 Corinthians, and then he needs to be restored in 2 Corinthians.
I sometimes wonder when it comes to the forgiveness issue if we've prayed the Lord's Prayer lately. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Sure. Larry Dixon, thank you for coming our way. The book's called When Temptation Strikes. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.